Joined live in studio by guests to discuss the president's scorecard and the hits and misses of the Jubilee administration ever since they got into government and up about the time they will be exiting government that is come next year. And I'm joined none other than Nzioka Waita, President Uhuru Kenyatta's Chief of Staff, as well as the head of the Presidential Delivery Unit. Thank you very much for making time for us this evening. So as we kickstart this conversation, I want us to begin with a concern that has come up of late, and it has been termed as the militarization of agencies and even Nairobi as a capital city. Of course, the president in the previous past has stated very clearly that the purpose of bringing these military heads to head these institutions is for the purposes of accountability and ensuring that he delivers on his mandate as the head of state. But I'm also sure you've had the concerns that have been raised by other leaders that this trend sort of portends on or portends danger to our democracy, does it?
I'll say maybe a couple of things on that, Alan. And the first is to say that our defense forces are exceptional men and women. We have entrusted them to protect far greater things. We trust them to protect our democracy. We trust them to protect our constitutional order. We trust them to protect us from foreign aggression. It only follows that we should be able to extend some of this trust into other activities, for example. And here I prefer to focus on substance over form. So the president has been very deliberate in his actions and to where he has relied upon expertise from the defense forces. One is Nairobi Metropolitan Services, under the very able leadership of General Badi. Lieutenant General Badi should be measured by results, not by conjecture. And results are very simple. In the almost 2 years that they've been in office, level 1, level 2, level 3 hospitals have gone up 1,000%. You know, we now have 19 new hospitals in almost all our informal settlements of Nairobi. We have seen major changes to our urban transport management. Okay. If you look at the Green Park Terminal as a case in point, if you look at what they're doing with markets, when they came in, we had a very serious situation with a number of markets. There are 44 markets in Nairobi. If I just take a couple, if you take Uhuru Market, if you take Muthurwa, if you take a number of these where Karioko, for instance, and City Park, all of these, under the leadership of NMS, they've managed to be able to bring garbage collection, some order to the allocation of those stalls, and some sanity in how these things done. Our road network in Nairobi, 82 kilometers done as of last week. New roads recarpeted by the NMS. So it begs the question, and if you ask residents, I think you should ask the residents of Nairobi, go to Eastlands, go to Utawala, ask them, what do you think about NMS? Their only issue is services, are they being delivered or not? And the fact of the matter is they are being delivered.
All right.
Kenya Meat Commission, Alan, which is a big issue of complaint. 1 year ago, KMC was slaughtering 8 animals a day. They are doing 110 animals a day today. They've paid over 680 million to pastoralists for cattle. So, what is this kelele about? If you trust these soldiers to look after you at night, you can't trust them to look after a meat factory?
Well, fair enough. We'll get to the NMS in just a short while, but I just want us to have a look at this particular tweet, because leaders play a very key role in our society, and whatever message they put out there has a ripple effect on people. So let's just have a look at this tweet by one of our leaders right here in the nation, and this is from Honorable Millicent Omanga, and as you can see on your screens right now, the tweet says, militarizing every institution in this country portends danger for a nascent democracy. Now, KEMSA has been taken over by KDF. Which state institution is next? Could it be that now the normalized military takeovers are a preparation for the takeover of IBC? Am I overthinking? I want us to focus on this last bit of that tweet, and it's sort of alludes to the fact that there's some sort of trend. That is, I want to believe that is what the Honorable is trying to allude to, that this is forming some sort of trends based on the military appointments that have been happening. So as the executive arm of government, how do you interpret such a
This is a very short and simple answer.
Yes.
Our honorable women rep, who I know very well, and I've had the privilege to work alongside her in a number of initiatives, she's answered her own question by saying, is she overthinking?
Yeah.
Yes, she's overthinking.
That's just it. You believe she's overthinking. All right, fair enough. Okay, let's now get to the NMS that you had earlier on spoken about. Last year, the then former Governor Mike Mbuvi Sonko signed a deed that saw the transfer of certain key functions to the body of the NMS that was newly created at that particular time. Tremendous strides that NMS has actually achieved, especially in the health sector, as you've spoken on. But also, still again on the leaders, they've raised concerns that in the unlikely event that something wrong occurs, they won't be able to summon these institutions and dockets for accountability and oversight just based on the fact that they're being headed by military personnel and they're bound by the principle that they execute orders from above.
Yeah, but is that true?
Yeah.
Is it true? Because the budget for NMS goes through parliamentary appropriation. Mm-hmm. So I have not had Parliament summoning General Badi, and he has refused to go. Mm-hmm. I mean, is this true? I mean, how much time do you want us to spend discussing conjecture? Mm-hmm. You know, it's not true. Yeah. I don't think there's anybody who has been called by an oversight body that has refused to attend and has hidden behind any form of structural immunity of the defense forces.
Okay.
Even the defense forces themselves have their own oversight committees. It just depends on those committees may not be necessarily in public, and they have their own modus operandi. But every institution in the country is accountable.
All right. Well, as we wind up...
And there's no evidence to demonstrate the contrary. What you see are politicians probably making statements because they feel some of this space may have been taken. The intention of the president is not to hurt devolution. Yeah. But he has a serious challenge because county number 47 is the capital city of Kenya. 60% of the country's GDP is generated from within the four corners of Nairobi. There was only so much time that could be lost to politicking when we needed to get this economy of this, our capital city, back on its feet. Honorable Sonko signed this deed in broad daylight.
Yeah.
And it has been challenged. The courts have found it to be valid. The mere fact that you have a military personnel with an outstanding jacket and record serving for the city does not diminish the achievements of NMS in any form or kind. And I think the important thing is to focus on the president's intention, which was to make Nairobi safer, was to make Nairobi cleaner, was to deliver services which the people had not received from the time Evans Kidero, even before Evans Kidero became governor, because he also never delivered for the people of Nairobi.
Okay. Well, just as we wind up on this conversation surrounding accountability with these bodies that are headed by military personnel, last week, a few days ago, we also had Senator Sagaja in one of his interviews make a remark that MCAs in the Nairobi County Assembly are sort of scared to play their oversight role when it comes to NMS. So where does this leave the question around accountability, if in any case there is truth to that?
I don't know whether there's truth, and I would not have enough facts to counter that. Yeah. I mean, Honorable Sakaja is in charge of the oversight function for devolved governments, and if he has a point to make, I am sure he has a basis to make those points. But the fact of the matter is, there is no forum constitutionally empowered to provide oversight to the NMS, and the NMS has failed to honor any summons or request to provide information or accountability. And I think that is what we should discuss.
All right.
Not the feelings. People can feel in any way, but let's discuss facts.
All right, fair enough. Zoka, the Big Four agenda is the president's legacy, and I believe once he exits office, it will be pegged on the infrastructural development that he's actually been able to put in place ever since he got into power. And I just want to make reference to a certain report that was done by the Institute of Public Finance Kenya on the Big Four scorecard in counties. It shows that counties allocated less than 10% to those key areas, which is agriculture, health, infrastructure, and trade. Now, looking at the investment of government over the past years in the tune of well over 2 trillion in terms of the Big Four agenda, when President Uhuru Kenyatta exits office, where does this leave him in terms of actually achieving that legacy if you already have counties are also back in terms of actually allocating funds to see to it that it comes to fruition?
There's always going to be a fine balance in as far as how much the national government can dictate the spending at devolved level. Once the shareable revenue goes to the county governments have their own priorities. Surprisingly, health, agriculture are actually devolved functions. So if they're allocating less than 10%, it just goes to show some of the misguided prioritization at devolved county level, at devolved government level. But I do not believe that's the case across the board. But when it comes to the president's scorecard on the Big Four, I'll say this. The Big Four does not stand alone. The Big Four is actually what we call medium-term plan 3. It's actually the third medium term of Vision 2030. It happened to coincide with the president's second term, which is 2017 to 2022. So it's a 5-year period. And during this time, the president decided to focus on accelerating the Vision 2030 pillars by zeroing in on 4 key areas, trying to grow the contribution of our manufacturing sector to GDP, right? Trying to increase the contribution of our food security basket, trying to deal with universal health access, making it affordable and making it ubiquitous in terms of its presence across the country. And largely trying to deal with the issue of dignifying housing. Now, these priorities don't change, and any government that will come into place is going to find that these are the same challenges outlined in the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics as being some of the issues that trouble Kenyans the most. People want to know how they will be treated. Access to affordable health care is perhaps the top of everybody's agenda. Having a roof over one's head, whether you rent, whether you own, just living in dignity is a key priority for every individual. The play on manufacturing is really about job creation at every level, whether it is really basic cottage industry manufacturing to its most complex form. On the issue of agriculture is 28% of our GDP, so it really employs majority of Kenyans. These priorities will not change irrespective of which administration takes over. And I want to say that right now when everybody can hear, there will be no abracadabra economics that is going to deviate from providing essential basics that really provide the foundation for economic prosperity. The Big Four is underpinned by a number of key enablers. We need to have proper governance and security. We need to have affordable access to electricity. We need to have infrastructure that works across the board, affordable infrastructure that works. I really do not see how anybody taking over the next in the next year trying to do something radically different. What might change maybe is how they approach it, but the fundamentals remain the same.
Well, let's take a break at this point on the Sunday Review, but do stay with us. We get back with the conversation in just a short while. Thank you for staying with us. Welcome back to the Sunday Review. For those joining us right now, this evening I'm having a discussion with Nzioka Waita, the Chief of Staff for President Uhuru Kenyatta, as well as the head of the Presidential Delivery Unit. Nzioka, before the break, we were talking about the Big Four agenda, and we've already established that infrastructure is going to be President Uhuru Kenyatta's legacy. Now, I want to focus on one of those projects, and that is the SGR project, which was very big, and of course, the president takes pride in that. Now, looking at an interview, one of the businessmen here in the country had, that is Jimmy Wanjigi, he said it very clearly that at the initial phase of that plan, the project costed 55 billion, but later on it escalated to over 300 billion, and that is one of the reasons as to why we're in so much debt when it comes to that particular project. So I'm trying to understand, how did a PPP project turn into a government project, and who's to blame if in any case there is blame to be put, because that would have meant the PPP route would have saved the country a lot of money and actually reduced the debt that we have probably accrued to date.
I've been in government now for, this is going to my sixth year. It's going to my sixth year. And previous to that, I used to deal with external affairs for one of the telcos. So I worked very closely with the government. In probably about 10 or so years, I have never come across Jimmy Wanjigi in any government corridors. So I don't know what job he does.
Yeah.
So I don't know to what extent we can take any information he gives about government expenditure and projects, with any level of seriousness. I don't know how would he be privy to such information.
Yeah. He says he was the brainchild behind the project.
In what capacity?
Yeah.
In what capacity? I mean, really? Really?
Yeah. All right, fine.
I think if you want to discuss the SGR,
yes,
it is true that the concept of the SGR was formulated in the Grand Coalition government. But many things were said in the Grand Coalition government, but few things were executed for various reasons. One, time may not have been on their side. Two, they may not have had the resources. Three, the political environment at the time. So when this administration took over and made very deliberate decisions to deal with the infrastructure deficit that the country was facing, one of the key priorities, in addition to other aspects of infrastructure,
yes,
was getting rail transport to be reliable and affordable. A key element of that was to do the SGR. The SGR was going to be done in 3 phases. Initially, it was Mombasa to Nairobi, then Nairobi to Suswa, Narok, and then Suswa to the border with Uganda. Okay. And then the Ugandans would carry it on to their border with Rwanda, and then the Rwandans would take it until Kigali. For a number of reasons, the last component that takes the project from Narok to Uganda via Kisumu has not panned out. Right. And it has not panned out for reasons beyond the control of the Kenya government.
Okay.
But for the portion that was done, I think history is the best way to assess this project.
All right.
We cannot comment on the cost of the project based on estimates done by people who have never set foot in government. They have never once held any government position. They have never taken an oath before the government in order to execute responsibilities, be privy to cabinet papers, be privy to economic planning. So it's very difficult for me to respond to rumor mongering. So what I do know is that the railway has been built.
Yes.
It is in service. It is giving a return. We do have a debt that it is faced with, and we are paying that debt.
All right. So it's safe enough to say that that was just hot air.
It is politics, and we're in the season where people will get away saying anything.
All right. Okay. Well, let's talk about debt. When President Mwai Kibaki was getting into office, it stood at around 630 million. When he was exiting, it was around 1.1 trillion. And now President Uhuru Kenyatta is looking at a staggering 7.7 trillion. Of course, all factors considered, inflation and the growth of economies. How then do you convince Kenyans that whatever the head of state has been able to do, despite all of this, overrides this conversation that is going to exit office and leave Kenyans with a very huge debt?
if you want a home, most normal people
Yeah.
will take a mortgage. Mortgages go, 20, 25 years. That's how you build wealth. You know, you may not be able to buy and afford things overnight. The key issue to ask about Kenya's debt is not quantum, it's sustainability. Number one, we maintain discipline to have debt to GDP ratio in the region of about 60%, right? That has not changed. We go through the tools of working with the National Assembly to look at the debt ceilings as and when that is required. Number two, we have not had a situation where debt distress has stopped us from servicing our debt. So this debt is being dealt with, it is being paid, and we are dealing with it. Of course, the National Treasury will let you know that they are trying to optimize this debt by reducing our exposure to commercial debt, trying to get longer tenure, more affordable debt, so that we also reduce the pressure on the government in terms of debt expenditure versus money that we have for development.
Okay.
Now, having said that, what have we done with these resources? It is the critical thing. So Kenyans will not just be left with a debt at the end of President Kenyatta's term. Number one, the debt to GDP will remain largely around the 60% region.
Yeah.
We will be servicing it. We have gone through a pandemic when our economic growth was 0.3%, and we were still able to meet our creditors and look them in the eye and meet those obligations. Number two, you will be left with new infrastructure across the board, whether it is in the road sector, in the rail sector, in the aviation sector, in the port and maritime sector. Every aspect of our infrastructure deficit has taken a quantum leap under President Kenyatta's administration. Okay. You know, in my conversations with him, whenever you give him the side eye and say, Mr. President, are we so sure about this debt situation? And he says, look at where we have come from and look at where we are going. By the time I leave this office, I can tell you that Kenya will be on the tipping point of economic growth. Actually, President Kenyatta's successor will be very lucky because they will get an economy that is now coming to a point where it can take off. They will not be saddled with post-COVID recovery and all this other stuff. You know, they will get an economy that's largely getting ready to move into autopilot phase, where it can coast and all it needs is good direction from time to time.
Well, referring or making reference to the interview that the head of state initially had, he talked of losing 2 billion per day due to corruption. And you've also spoken about what you've been able to do as the Jubilee administration. I believe with these resources, you would have actually even done more by the time you come into the end of your term next year. So this, and coupled with a statement, I just want you to clarify if there's any truth to this. There was a statement, of course you've mentioned we're in the political phase, there was a statement made by the second in command, that is the deputy president, in one of his rallies. He said that the main reason as to why the Jubilee administration hasn't necessarily been able to effect the Big Four agenda as it ought to have is because some of the funds were channeled towards reggae. And we all know what reggae means at this point. So is there any sort of truth to this? This is where the rain started hitting us? You
know, I'm always cautious about jumping into political conjecture.
Yes.
What I'll say is this.
Yeah.
The president did two things. In 2018, in his love for his country and understanding the need for cohesion, he spearheaded the handshake. And that immediately lowered temperatures in the country and allowed the economy to move. The second thing he did, in anticipation of the political theatrics, he restructured the government subtly but significantly in January of 2019 by issuing Executive Order Number 1. Now, Executive Order Number 1 created two institutional frameworks. Yeah. One is the Cabinet Committee on Development, chaired by Honorable Dr. Fred Matiang'i. Two is the Cabinet Subcommittee on Development, the Technical Committee of Principal Secretaries, chaired by Dr. Karanja Kibicho. In the 24 months from 2019 to date, the development agenda, the execution of Big Four priorities, the delivery of government promises has moved smoothly with no interruption, and irrespective of whether there is reggae or there is other activities, political or otherwise, happening on the sidelines, the functions of government, the commitments of the president have been delivered without and in spite and despite all that political noise and noise making. Right. So what you may hear is maybe some is a messaging going on, subliminal messaging going on that has nothing to do with the Big Four. Okay. But I'll tell you, as the custodian of the president's development KPIs, right? The chair of our cabinet committee, NDICC, Dr. Fred Matiang'i, has been ruthlessly focused on delivering to those KPIs.
All right. Well, fair enough. We can leave that at that. Let's talk about IMF. Now, IMF announced that it has reached a staff-level agreement on the second review of the extended fund facility that, upon approval by the executive board, will see to it that Kenya has access to money in the tune of 264 million. Now, looking back before the first installment, they stipulated certain conditions that had to be met before the money was rolled out. And one of those that's very close to the Kenyan people is that the government had to restructure certain aspects of its governance, and in some instances, due to redundancy, many people would lose their jobs. Now, this tied with the promise that the head of state gave us when Jubilee was coming into power that it would create 6.5 million new jobs. Where does this leave that question of job employment?
So the first thing I'll say is, can we debunk the fact that the government should be the employer of choice? Actually, you would be safer when the government was leaner, with less people, and not going out on an employment spree. The job of the government is to create an environment for the private sector to generate wealth. And that is what we have been focused on. The government, aside from core responsibilities, recruitment of nurses, doctors, recruitment of policemen, recruitment of servicemen to the military, recruitment of the NYS, recruitment of certain cadres within the civil service that are essential to the delivery of public service. That is the only focus that has happened. But in terms of the government being the one to employ, millions of people, that will never be the case. And hopefully even in the future, that will also not be the case. Yeah. I think the priority remains creating an environment where the private sector can actually confidently expand their employment base. So that is what we have been focusing on. The conditions set out by the IMF, the Treasury, they have a very difficult job of managing the fiscus, but they do it very well. They are sober. They guide us in our development priorities. They tell us when the envelope, our aspirations cannot fit in the envelope, and they simply say there is no money. Let's focus and complete, as per the president's instructions, let's complete all the projects that are 75% and above. Mengine tutawachia wengine.
Okay, so looking at what you've talked about, the government being the enabling, sort of creating an environment, and looking at that, still on that promise that you gave to Kenyans of being able to create those jobs, where are we with barely 10 months to the end of this particular administration?
Okay, we had a major setback over the last 2 years. And we lost close to 1 million jobs in the pandemic, in different sort of cadres. When you look at the statistics of the unemployed and the underemployed, we are looking at over 44%. So we could have done better in terms of creating employment, but also we were not immune to the shocks that hit us. Kenya is primarily dependent on services. The measures taken to contain the pandemic, including lockdown measures, cost us quite a number of jobs. Key sectors in the first few months that were big employers and were heavily dependent on an open market. For example, our horticultural exports, when the Europeans were in lockdown, that really hit us very hard. our flour and food exports, the challenges we had with logistics. Okay. All those have had a spiraling effect on the country. And even with the best of intentions, yeah, I think the focus right now for the president up until the end of his term will be sticking with the priority of building back. All right. Really trying to take us back to where we were in the pre-pandemic days, trying to ensure that the country has the appropriate tools to live with COVID, to make sure our hospitals have enough oxygen, to make sure enough Kenyans get vaccinated, to make sure as and when there are developments in the treatment of COVID, right, that we are in the line to get such medication, so that we are able to keep our economy moving without having to take any more drastic measures.
Well, just as I give you this opportunity to give your closing remarks, recently, a few days ago during the Mashujaa Day celebrations, the president gave out interventions, and this stimulus was well in the tune of 25 billion. And this is probably the third one in well under 1 year. And the big question that Kenyans are asking is, what really is the difference? What sort of difference did that 50 plus stimulus package, the first one in itself, make a difference other than the tax and the financial reliefs that were there for this new one now to be rolled out?
I think you should really sit around the table, yeah, and ask the owners of capital, yeah, what they think about the stimulus in the first package. When you look at what happened in the first stimulus package of about 58 billion, taxes, okay, PAYE, actually effectively people ended up with a pay rise. Yeah. Because the PAYE went down significantly. It allowed people to have a bit of disposable income. Those who were still employed. For employers, having their corporation tax adjusted somewhat in certain categories, that also helped them. Looking at tax relief that was for those earning below 24,000, again, that kept a lot of people in survival mode. If we look at the over 10 billion shillings that went into Kazi Mtaani, yeah, that kept close to 260,000 young people in employment up until just a couple of months ago when we managed to get a renewal, right, of the fund. Yeah. So if you ask, what did this stimulus do? It kept people away from extreme poverty. Okay. It kept quite a number of employers able to keep prevented them from having to retrench significant portions of their staff complement. Yeah. It also helped key sectors of the economy to recover. If you look at the third stimulus announced when we were at Wanguru in Kirinyaga, yes, right? It's targeted, it's very targeted. Tea and coffee, key sectors of their key employers. I mentioned to you earlier that agriculture forms 28% of our GDP. Tea and coffee forms a huge portion of that. The measures taken on animal feed to reduce the cost of animal feed, yeah, will have a huge impact on dairy farmers, chicken farmers, people who produce eggs, that whole grouping of people. When you look at direct measures that will be taken for movement of, yeah, cash, yeah, again, for the trading community, these are huge steps. All right. Mortgage debt, people with loans up to 5 million shillings being given some form of leeway by their banks and not being listed by CRB. These forms of stimulus, both cash and policy oriented, have had a huge impact.
All right.
And I would say it was the right way to go.
Sure thing. Thank you very much for making time for us. Nzioka Waita, President Uhuru Kenyatta's Chief of Staff and the head of the Presidential Delivery Unit. Of course, we'll have this conversation at some other time. Thank you very much for your time. Let's now get some sports news.
K24 Sports News, powered by Mozartbet.
What would you do with 20 million shillings? The biggest maximum payout per bet in Kenya. Kuwa mshindi. Fanya uamuzi. Mozartbet.
Well, let's now get some sports news. Paris Jepchirchir became the first reigning Olympic champion to win the New York City Marathon after beating counterpart Viola Chepto to cross the line first and win the 50th edition of the race. Jepchirchir clocked 2 hours, 22 minutes and 39 seconds, just 4 seconds ahead of Bernard Lagat's younger sister Viola Chepto. Ababel Yesene of Ethiopia finished third. Albert Korir won the men's race in a time of 2 hours, 8 minutes and 22 seconds. Morocco's Mohamed Rida El Arabi finished second as Eyob Faniel took the third position.
She has pulled off the double. Korir, just shy of his own personal best. Yes, he's #1 in New York City. The 50th New York City Marathon to Albert Korir of Kenya.
Premier League defending champions Tusker FC lost their third league match this season following a 3-0 defeat to Kariobangi Sharks in the FKFPL match played at the Kasarani Stadium on Sunday. Felix Oluwoch gave Sharks the lead in the 63rd minute with Sydney Lokale and Patrick Otieno scoring the other goals to put the game beyond the visitors. In other matches of the day, Bandari FC goalkeeper Michael Wanyika saved a penalty in the dying minutes to help his team earn a 1-1 draw against host Kakamega Homeboys. Sofapaka beat FC Leopards 1-0 as the Lindsay Stars registered a 2-2 draw against Talanta FC.
Tumefungwa, hatukucheza vizuri second half, lakini first half tulipata chance nyingi zimetukosa second half. Hatukuwa tulivu first half. Sharks first half ilipiga shoti moja tu kwa goal, lakini second half tumepeana easy goal sana.
Kila wakati mimi hupenda kurudisha shukrani kwa wachezaji. Kazi njema umeonyesha haswa kipindi cha pili. Tulikuwa tunahitaji labda matokeo mema na kwa kuzingatia labda wale kwa kuweka maanani yale ambayo tulikuwa tumewaambia, nafikiri kipindi cha pili kimekuwa kizuri kwetu.
Cup winners Ulinzi Starlets have been crowned the 2021 FKF Women's Super Cup champion following a 9-8 penalty victory over Thika Queens in the WPL Cat and Razor match played at the Utali grounds on Sunday. Rebecca Okwaro gave Thika Queens the lead in the second half before Lucy Nato leveled for Ulinzi Starlets, forcing the match to the penalties. Starlets scored all their penalties as Thika lost 1 to give Starlets a 9-8 victory as they prepare for the 2021-2022 Women Premier League season.
Wachezaji kwa kujitolea na kujituma kwa hizo dakika. Nashukuru sana. It is not easy. It is our start. Na yena inamaanisha tuliwin against Figa, tumewin against Thika. So now we are ready for the league.
Imekuwa challenge fiti na tumekuwa new dog kwa ligi. Na umeona tumechukua FKF Cup, tumechukua Super Cup. So watu wanafaa kujua hapa nje, msilale. Sione kama Simba amenyeshia kadhani paka. We are coming.
Expectation yangu ilikuwa ni kupiga win. Yeah, because hii game ilikuwa plus kwangu kujipanga kwa what next kwa game ya ligi kianza.
Elsewhere, Real Madrid survived a late onslaught to return to the top of La Liga following a 2-1 victory over Rayo Vallecano in the Spanish La Liga round 13 match played last night. Well, that's just about it right here on the Sunday Review. As usual, it's been a pleasure. I'll see you next Sunday, same time, same place, but different clothes. My name is Alan Abinadab Owino. Walter Sere has been my companion in the sign language desk. Do have a good one.